When I met Olivia in college, she was everything I wasn't: bright, outgoing, and from a world I could barely comprehend. Her family was wealthy in a way that felt almost unreal. Her dad owned a chain of high-end restaurants, and her mom was always planning some lavish charity event. Meanwhile, I was just a regular guy from a working-class family, juggling part-time jobs and student loans to get through school. We clicked immediately, though. I liked her sharp sense of humor and the way she didn't take herself too seriously, even with all that privilege behind her. She said she liked my ambition, my groundedness. It felt real, like we saw something in each other that nobody else could. Her family? Not so much. I don't think her parents ever outright hated me, but they weren't subtle about their opinions. Her mom always had this tight smile whenever I was around, like she was being polite out of obligation. Her dad never bothered pretending. He'd grill me about my future every time we saw each other, like I was on some kind of probation. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years, Ethan? What's your plan once college is over? Can you support a family on that?" I wanted to tell him to back off, but Olivia would always squeeze my hand under the table or flash me this reassuring smile, and I'd let it go. It didn't matter what they thought, I told myself. I wasn't marrying them. When I proposed, Olivia was thrilled. For a while, I thought maybe I'd won her parents over. They congratulated us. Her mom even hugged me, and I felt like I'd finally crossed whatever invisible line had been keeping me on the outside. Then came the prenup. I remember sitting in their enormous living room, the kind of place where even the cushions on the couch probably cost more than my tuition. Her dad had his lawyer there, a stiff-looking guy with a briefcase, who handed me a stack of papers and explained the terms. If we ever divorced, I'd walk away with nothing. No access to their family wealth, no alimony, nothing but what I came in with. Olivia looked embarrassed, her cheeks flushed as she avoided eye contact with me. "It's just a formality," she said later when we were alone. "You know how my parents are." I didn't care about the money. I loved Olivia, not her bank account, so I signed the damn thing without a second thought. But looking back, that was probably the first crack in the foundation. Not the prenup itself, but what it represented. Her family had never seen me as an equal, and by signing, I'd accepted that on some level. We got married the summer after graduation. It was a beautiful ceremony, ridiculously expensive, but Olivia was radiant, and for a while, nothing else mattered. We built a life together, had our first daughter, Mia, a couple of years later, and settled into what felt like a good rhythm. I worked long hours to support us while Olivia stayed home with the baby. It was her choice, and I was happy to give her that. Over the years, we had 2 more kids, Josh and Ellie, and life got busier but also better in a lot of ways. Money was tight sometimes, but Olivia's family helped out with the big things: vacations, private school, even some home renovations. I was grateful, though I tried to keep us as independent as possible. I didn't want to feel like I owed them. Things started to change about 10 years ago. Her family's fortune, which I thought was unshakable, began to crumble. There were lawsuits, bad investments, scandals. The money stopped flowing as freely, and Olivia's parents went from hosting charity galas to quietly selling off properties. At first, Olivia seemed to take it in stride. "It's just a rough patch," she'd say. "They'll bounce back." But they didn't. The allowances dried up, and the lifestyle she'd always known was gone. That's when the cracks in our marriage started to show. She wasn't the same Olivia I'd fallen in love with. The little annoyances of everyday life seemed to hit her harder. She complained about how hard things had become, how much we'd lost. I tried to be patient, to remind her that we still had each other, but she'd just smile tightly and nod like she didn't really believe it. I chalked it up to the stress of losing her safety net. It couldn't have been easy, going from a life of privilege to something more ordinary. I thought we'd work through it, like we always had. I didn't see what was really happening. Looking back, I don't know how I missed it. Or maybe I just didn't want to see. It started with small things, subtle shifts that didn't seem like much at first but made me pause. Olivia began spending more time on her phone. She'd laugh at texts, then quickly set it face down when I entered the room. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a group chat with her friends, maybe something funny from social media. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who questioned every little thing. Then there were the errands. She suddenly had a lot of them, always insisting on going alone. "I need some time to myself," she'd say when I offered to come along. At first, I didn't think twice about it. With 3 kids and a full household, everyone needed their space. But it started to feel excessive. Grocery runs that used to take an hour now stretched into 2 or 3. Random trips across town to pick something up became a regular thing. The moment that really made my gut twist was when I came home early from work one day. My meeting had been canceled, and I thought I'd surprise her by picking up lunch for the 2 of us. But when I walked into the kitchen, there was no sign of her. Josh, our middle son, was doing homework at the table. "Where's Mom?" I asked. "She said she had to go grab something," he replied without looking up. "Did she say what?" He shrugged. "Groceries, I think. She left like an hour ago." Something about the way he said it, so casual, so routine, set off an alarm in my head. But I shoved it down. Olivia had always been independent. Maybe she just needed to clear her head. Then came the day I saw her car. I had left work early again, this time because I wasn't feeling well. Driving home, I stopped at a red light near a small strip mall. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her car parked at the far end of the lot. My first thought was that she was shopping, but when I looked closer, I saw her sitting in the driver's seat with someone else in the passenger seat. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell it wasn't a friend. It was a man, leaning toward her, and they looked far too comfortable. My stomach dropped, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't pull into the lot. I didn't confront her. I just drove past, my mind racing with questions. Was it innocent? A work thing? A misunderstanding? But the way she was smiling, the way her body language leaned toward him, it didn't feel innocent. That night, I couldn't look at her. She came home as usual, breezing into the kitchen with a cheery, "Hey, how was your day?" Like nothing had happened. I played along, too stunned to say anything. Every laugh, every casual comment she made felt fake, like I was seeing her for the first time and didn't recognize her anymore. I started paying closer attention after that. The phone that was always in her hand, the whispered conversations in another room, the sudden changes in her mood. She was careful, but not careful enough. One evening, while she was in the shower, I finally gave in to the gnawing doubt that had been eating at me. Her phone was charging on the kitchen counter, unlocked. My hands shook as I picked it up, feeling like I was crossing some unspoken line, but I couldn't stop myself. The messages were all there. Dozens of texts with a man named Ryan. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. You're the best part of my day." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My chest felt tight, and I could barely breathe. There were photos, too. Nothing explicit, but enough to confirm what I already knew. A picture of them sitting at a cafe, another of him holding her hand. I put the phone back exactly where I found it, every movement deliberate as if I was in a trance. The water in the shower was still running. She was singing softly, like she had no care in the world, and it made my stomach churn. I walked outside, needing air, needing space, needing anything to ground myself. I stood in the yard for what felt like hours, staring at the dark sky, trying to process what I'd just seen. 20 years of marriage, 3 kids, a life we'd built together. And she'd thrown it all away for this, for him. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while she slept soundly beside me. My mind was racing, replaying every moment of our marriage, every time I trusted her, every sacrifice I'd made for us. The next day, I called a lawyer. I didn't say a word to Olivia. I didn't confront her. I just needed to know my options. The lawyer was calm and professional, walking me through everything. She told me to gather evidence, to act carefully, and not to let emotions drive my decisions. For the next week, I pretended everything was normal. I smiled at Olivia, made small talk over dinner, and even kissed her goodbye in the mornings like nothing had changed. Inside, I was falling apart, but I knew I had to hold it together for the kids. They didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess. Not yet. Finally, when I'd gathered everything I needed, I filed for divorce. The papers were served at home while I was at work. That evening, when I walked through the door, she was sitting at the kitchen table, the envelope in front of her, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, "we need to talk." I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then I said, "I know, Olivia. I know everything." And I walked past her, into the quiet of my office, leaving her sitting there alone. That night, after I told Olivia I knew everything, the house felt impossibly quiet. I could hear her moving around downstairs, pacing, her footsteps quick and frantic. A few times, I thought she might come to my office and try to talk to me, but she didn't. Eventually, I heard the front door open and close, and her car started. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't care. The next morning, the kids were unusually subdued. Mia, our oldest, was the first to say something. "What's going on?" she asked as we sat at the breakfast table. I hesitated, unsure how much to say. "Your mom and I are going through some things right now," I said carefully. "But I want you to know it's not your fault, and we'll figure it out." Mia frowned, not satisfied with my answer, but she didn't press. Josh and Ellie, thankfully, were too young to ask deeper questions. By the time Olivia came back later that morning, I had already left for work. She texted me once, saying, "We need to talk. Please." I stared at the message for a long time before putting my phone down without replying. The kids must have known something was wrong because Olivia didn't waste time dragging them into it. That evening, when I got home, Mia was waiting for me in the living room, her arms crossed and her face tight with anger. "Mom says you're divorcing her," she said bluntly. I sighed and sat down, already bracing for what was coming. "Mia, this is between your mom and me. I don't want you to worry about it." "Don't do that," she snapped. "Don't talk to me like I'm a little kid. Why are you doing this?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Your mom made some choices that hurt our marriage, Mia. This isn't something I decided lightly." She shook her head, her frustration spilling over. "She said it was a mistake. People make mistakes, Dad. Why are you throwing everything away over one mistake?" It hit me then. Olivia had framed it as just a mistake, a slip-up, something that could be brushed off or forgiven if I wasn't so stubborn. I felt the anger bubbling up, but I swallowed it down. "This isn't about one mistake, Mia," I said carefully. "Your mom lied to me. For months. She broke the trust that holds a marriage together. It's not something you can just fix. But she's sorry." Mia shouted, her voice breaking. "She said she'll do anything to make it right, and you won't even try." I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "Mia, I know this is hard for you to understand. I love you, and I always will, but I can't stay in a marriage where there's no trust." She stared at me for a long moment, her face a mixture of hurt and anger. Then she stormed out of the room, slamming the door to her bedroom behind her. That conversation left me feeling drained in a way I hadn't expected. I knew Olivia would try to spin the situation, but hearing it repeated through Mia made it feel even worse. I'd always thought that, no matter what, my kids would see me as the stable one, the anchor. Now I wasn't so sure. The next few days were a blur of tense silences and awkward interactions. Olivia tried to talk to me a few times, but I kept my responses short, not wanting to get into it. Every time she said, "Can we talk?" or "I just want to explain," I felt my chest tighten. What was there to explain? I'd read the messages. I'd seen the photos. No amount of talking was going to change what she'd done. Mia started avoiding me, spending most of her time in her room or out with friends. Josh and Ellie seemed confused but didn't ask too many questions, for which I was grateful. Then came the day Olivia decided to push things further. I was in my office, going through some paperwork, when Mia knocked on the door. She rarely came to me for anything now, so I knew this wasn't going to be good. "Mom wants us all to sit down and talk," she said, her tone clipped. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. "She says it's about the family. About trying to fix things," Mia replied. "Can you just, please come? For us." It felt like a trap, but I couldn't say no to her. So later that evening, we all sat in the living room, me, Olivia, and the kids. Olivia was calm, collected, as though she'd rehearsed what she was about to say. "I know this has been hard on all of you," she began, looking at the kids with an expression that felt painfully fake to me. "But I want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to fix things. I made a mistake, and I'm deeply sorry for it. I love your dad, and I love this family. I just want us to move forward together." Mia looked hopeful. Josh and Ellie just looked confused. I stayed silent, my jaw tight, because I knew where this was heading. When she finally turned to me, her voice softened even more. "Ethan, can't we at least try? For the kids?" My heart pounded in my chest, anger and frustration bubbling just under the surface. I looked at the kids, at Mia, who clearly wanted me to agree, at Josh and Ellie, who didn't fully understand but were watching for my reaction. "Olivia," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I'm not going to sit here and pretend everything is fine for the sake of appearances. You made your choices, and now we're dealing with the consequences. That's the reality." Her face fell, but she quickly masked it with a look of disappointment, like I was the unreasonable one. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. "You're giving up on us?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "You gave up on us the moment you decided to lie to me." The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood up, excusing myself from the room, leaving Olivia to deal with the fallout of her carefully orchestrated plea. I didn't know how the kids would process what had just happened, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. The days after that family meeting were tense and uncomfortable. Olivia's attempt to guilt me into reconciliation had done more harm than good, at least from my perspective. Mia barely spoke to me, her disappointment radiating like a storm cloud every time we were in the same room. Josh and Ellie kept their heads down, unsure of how to navigate the tension. Olivia, meanwhile, seemed to be leaning into her role as the wounded spouse, dropping passive-aggressive comments every chance she got. One morning, as I was making coffee, she came into the kitchen. "I hope you're happy," she said quietly, not looking at me. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, already tired. She sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "You're tearing this family apart, Ethan. I hope you're ready to explain that to the kids when they ask why everything fell apart." I put the mug down, forcing myself to stay calm. "Don't do that," I said evenly. "Don't put this on me. You made the choices that brought us here." Her face twisted with frustration. "I made a mistake, Ethan. One mistake, and you're willing to throw away everything we've built? What about the kids? Do they mean anything to you?" I stared at her, my patience wearing thin. "Of course they mean something to me. That's why I won't sit here and let you twist the narrative. This isn't about me being unwilling to forgive. It's about you betraying everything we built and expecting me to act like it doesn't matter." Her eyes filled with tears, real or not, I couldn't tell anymore, and she stormed out of the room. I stood there for a long time, the silence in the house weighing heavy on my shoulders. Later that day, I got a text from Jane, my younger sister. She'd been one of the few people I'd confided in since this all began. "How are you holding up?" she wrote. I debated how much to say before replying. "It's a mess. Olivia's still trying to make me the villain, and the kids are caught in the middle." Jane's response came quickly. "You're doing the right thing, Ethan. It's going to hurt for a while, but you'll get through it. And the kids will see the truth eventually." I wanted to believe her, but it didn't feel that way. Every interaction with Mia was like walking on eggshells. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room trying to read, she came downstairs and stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Are you even going to try, Dad?" she asked abruptly. I set the book down, already exhausted by the conversation I knew was coming. "Mia, I've already told you." "I know what you've told me," she interrupted, "but it just feels like you're giving up. Like you don't even care about this family anymore." Her words cut deep, but I kept my voice steady. "I care about this family more than anything. That's why I'm doing this. Because staying in a marriage built on lies isn't what's best for any of us." She shook her head, clearly frustrated. "It just feels like you're punishing Mom. She made a mistake, and now you're making all of us pay for it." I stood up, taking a step closer to her. "Mia, listen to me. This isn't about punishment. It's about setting boundaries and knowing when something is broken beyond repair. Your mom made her choices, and now we're all dealing with the consequences. But that doesn't mean I don't love you, or Josh, or Ellie. I'll always be here for you." Her expression softened for a moment, like she wanted to believe me, But then she sighed and turned away. Whatever, she muttered, heading back upstairs. I sat back down, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. As much as I tried to convince myself I was doing the right thing, moments like that made me question everything. Was I being too rigid? Should I have tried harder, even if it meant swallowing my pride? But then I'd think back to those texts, to the nights Olivia lied to my face, pretending everything was fine while sneaking around with Ryan. And I knew, deep down, that staying together would have been a bigger betrayal, to myself and to the kids. A few days later, Josh approached me while I was in the garage fixing up some old shelves. He stood there awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot before finally speaking. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked. I stopped what I was doing, surprised by the question. "I'm okay, buddy. Why do you ask?" He shrugged, looking down. "You just seem different. And everyone's been yelling a lot." I put the screwdriver down and crouched so I was at his level. "It's been a hard time for all of us," I admitted. "But we're going to get through it. I promise." "Even if you and Mom don't get back together?" he asked quietly. My chest tightened, but I nodded. "Even if we don't get back together, we're still a family, no matter what. And I'll always be here for you, okay?" He nodded, his face serious in a way that made him seem older than his years. "Okay," he said softly before heading back inside. That moment stuck with me. It reminded me that, even if everything else was falling apart, my role as their father hadn't changed. I couldn't control how Olivia spun the story, or how Mia processed everything, but I could be steady for Josh and Ellie. I could show them, day by day, that we'd come out of this stronger. As for Olivia, her attempts to control the narrative weren't working as well as she'd hoped. Luke, who had been mostly neutral until now, started asking more questions, and I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes whenever Olivia tried to spin the situation in her favor. One night, as I was tucking Ellie into bed, she asked, "Daddy, are you mad at Mommy?" Her question caught me off guard, but I tried to keep my tone light. "I'm not mad, sweetie. Grown-ups just sometimes have a hard time getting along." She frowned, clearly unsatisfied with my answer, but she didn't push further. As I kissed her goodnight and turned off the light, I felt a pang of guilt. No matter how much I tried to shield them from the worst of it, they were still affected. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot, but I also knew that I couldn't let Olivia's actions define me or my relationship with the kids. I had to keep moving forward, one step at a time, even if it felt like I was walking through quicksand. The weeks dragged on, and things didn't get easier. If anything, the tension grew heavier, like a storm cloud hanging over the house. Olivia's attempts to play the victim didn't let up, and Mia continued to take her side, echoing her words back at me in arguments that left me drained. I kept reminding myself that she was just a kid trying to make sense of a situation that no child should have to navigate, but it didn't make it hurt any less. One evening, after another argument with Mia where she accused me of tearing the family apart, I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television. The sound was on, but I wasn't really watching. My thoughts were consumed with everything I'd lost, everything I was trying to hold together, and whether I was doing any of this right. Jane, my sister, called while I was sitting there. I almost didn't pick up, but I knew if I didn't, she'd just keep trying. "Hey," I said, my voice flat. "Wow, don't sound too excited to talk to me," she joked, but her tone was soft. "Sorry," I muttered. "It's been a lot." She didn't push me to explain. Jane had a way of knowing when to let me talk and when to just be there. After a pause, she said, "Ethan, you need to stop trying to carry all of this by yourself." "What choice do I have?" I asked, rubbing my temples. "The kids are caught in the middle. Olivia's spinning this whole story to make me look like the bad guy, and I feel like I'm losing Mia more every day. What am I supposed to do, Jane? Just sit back and watch it all fall apart?" "You're doing the best you can," she said firmly. "Mia's angry right now, but she's not going to stay that way forever. Kids grow up, Ethan. They figure things out. She'll see the truth eventually." I wanted to believe her, but the idea of waiting years for Mia to come around felt unbearable. What if she doesn't? I asked quietly. "She will," Jane insisted. "You just have to hold on." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. I knew Jane was trying to give me hope, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things might never go back to how they were. The turning point came unexpectedly, at the most ordinary of times. I was helping Josh with a school project one afternoon, cutting out pieces of cardboard for a diorama he had to make. He was focused, his brow furrowed in concentration, when he suddenly said, "Mia's wrong, you know." I froze mid-cut. "What do you mean?" "About you. She says you don't care about us anymore." "But that's not true," Josh said matter-of-factly, like he was stating a simple fact. "You're always here. You're trying." "I can see that." My throat tightened, and I had to take a deep breath before responding. "Thanks, buddy. That means a lot to me." He shrugged, as if it was no big deal, and went back to gluing pieces of cardboard together. But his words stuck with me, giving me a spark of hope I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't just Josh who started to come around. Luke, who had been quiet and neutral for most of the ordeal, began asking me more questions. One night, while we were watching a basketball game together, he turned to me and said, "Dad, why didn't you just forgive her?" The question caught me off guard, but I didn't dodge it. "It's not that simple, Luke," I said. "Forgiveness is one thing, but trust is another. Your mom broke my trust in a way that can't be repaired. If I stayed, it wouldn't be honest. Not to me, and not to you guys." Luke nodded slowly, staring at the screen. "I get it," he said after a moment. "It just sucks, you know?" "Yeah," I agreed, "it does." As the weeks turned into months, the divorce proceedings moved forward, and Olivia's desperation became more apparent. She started texting me late at night, messages that ranged from apologies to pleas to outright accusations. "I don't know how you can be so cold. You're destroying this family, Ethan. The kids are going to hate you for this." At first, I felt guilty. Every time my phone buzzed, it was like a jolt to my already frayed nerves. But over time, the guilt turned into anger. How dare she try to blame me for the mess she created? How dare she weaponize the kids against me? Eventually, I stopped responding altogether. My lawyer handled most of the communication, and I focused on keeping things as normal as possible for the kids. One night, Mia surprised me by coming into my office and sitting down across from me. She looked uncomfortable, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "I talked to Josh," she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? What about?" "About you." "About all of this," she said, gesturing vaguely. "He said he thinks you're trying." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "What do you think?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know. I'm still mad, but I don't think you don't care. I guess I just don't understand why it had to happen like this." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the vulnerability behind her anger. "I get that," I said gently, "and I'm sorry that this is so hard on you. But, Mia, you have to understand. Sometimes, no matter how much you want to fix something, it's already broken. Staying together wouldn't have made things better. It would have made them worse." She didn't respond right away, but she didn't leave either. Eventually, she nodded, her expression still conflicted but softer than it had been. "I just wish it wasn't like this," she said. "Me too," I admitted. After she left, I sat there in the quiet, feeling a small flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The final stages of the divorce came faster than I expected. It felt like both a relief and a gut punch, like closing a chapter I'd never wanted to end but knew I couldn't keep rewriting. Olivia tried to drag things out, pleading with me through our lawyers, sending more texts late at night. But I stayed firm. I'd made my decision, and no amount of guilt or manipulation could change it. The kids' reactions continued to shift as the reality of the situation settled in. Mia had softened since our talk, though she still kept her distance most of the time. Josh and Luke seemed to fall into a rhythm, adapting to the new normal in a way only kids could. Ellie, being the youngest, asked the hardest questions, innocent but piercing. "Why can't you and Mommy just say sorry to each other?" she asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. I sat on the edge of her bed, stroking her hair. "Sometimes sorry isn't enough, sweetheart," I said gently. "Sometimes, when people hurt each other too much, they can't go back to the way things were. But it doesn't mean we don't love you or your brothers and sister." That will never change. She nodded, her little face scrunched in thought, then hugged me tightly. I love you, Daddy, she whispered. I love you too, I said, my voice thick. The house felt quieter after the divorce was finalized. Olivia moved out, taking an apartment nearby to stay close to the kids. It wasn't a smooth transition. There were tears, fights, and moments when I questioned everything. But over time, the dust began to settle. One night, a few weeks after Olivia left, Mia came into the living room and sat down next to me on the couch. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the TV. Hey, I said cautiously. Hey, she replied, still not looking at me. After a moment, she added, I think I get it now. Get what? Why you couldn't stay with Mom, she said, her voice quiet but steady. It still sucks, but I understand. She shouldn't have done what she did. And I guess, I'm sorry for being so mad at you. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I turned to look at her, seeing the same little girl I used to carry on my shoulders, the one who always wanted to be around me when she was younger. You don't have to apologize, Mia, I said softly. I know this has been hard on you. I just hope you know how much I love you, no matter what. She nodded, her eyes glossy, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she leaned against me like she used to when she was a kid. I put my arm around her, and we sat there in silence, the weight between us finally starting to lift. Over the next few months, life settled into a new rhythm. The kids split their time between my house and Olivia's, and while it wasn't perfect, it worked. I focused on being present for them, showing up for every soccer game, every school event, every late-night conversation when one of them needed me. Olivia and I maintained a cold civility. We spoke only when necessary, keeping conversations brief and centered on the kids. She still sent the occasional text about how she regretted everything and wished we could start over, but I never responded. I'd moved past anger and resentment, but I wasn't going to give her the closure she was looking for. One evening, Luke and I were sitting in the garage, working on a woodworking project he'd taken an interest in. He looked up from sanding a piece of wood and said, "You seem happier now, Dad." I paused, caught off guard. "Do I?" "Yeah," he said, nodding. "You're not as stressed all the time. It's nice." His words stuck with me. I hadn't realized it until he said it, but he was right. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, like I wasn't constantly bracing for the next blow. The kids started to notice the changes too. There were more laughs at the dinner table, more moments where we just enjoyed being together. Even Mia, who'd once been so angry with me, started to open up again. One afternoon, while we were sitting on the porch, she said, "I think I'm okay with how things are now." "Yeah?" I asked, looking over at her. "Yeah," she said with a small smile. "It's different, but it's not bad. I just want us all to be happy, even if we're not all together anymore." Her words brought a lump to my throat, but I managed to smile. That's all I want too. Life didn't magically become perfect. There were still challenges, still moments when the pain of what happened crept back in. But day by day, things got better. I rebuilt my life piece by piece, focusing on the people who mattered most. In the end, I learned that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that set you free. And though the scars of the past will always be there, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace.